"Please, I don't want to do this," the little girl said to her mother, and what the millionaire did when he saw that. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's begin. In the Upper East Side, Manhattan's most exclusive neighborhood, an imposing townhouse stood out among the other luxurious residences. With its impeccably manicured gardens, mirrored windows, and Italian marble columns supporting the facade, the Miller home was a symbol of wealth and prestige. Robert Miller, the family patriarch, ran a tech company valued in the millions, while his wife Beatrice was a constant figure in the society pages, always photographed at charity events in her designer dresses and dazzling jewelry. Few people, however, knew Julia Miller, Robert's 7-year-old daughter from his first relationship. Reserved inampede, she almost never appeared in public photos or at social events. According to the closest circles, the girl was extremely shy, sensitive, and still reeling from the premature loss of her biological mother, Marianne, who had passed away when Julia was only 3 after a serious illness. Beatrice, whom Robert had married 2 years later, had taken on the role of mother, although she had never officially adopted the girl. To the public, she represented the perfect stepmother, discreet but attentive, firm but affectionate. Within the high walls of that townhouse, however, the image was beginning to show cracks. On a seemingly ordinary morning, Robert was returning from a business trip to Chicago. The flight had arrived ahead of schedule, and he decided not to announce his early return, thinking of surprising his daughter. As he climbed the marble stairs with his executive briefcase still in hand, he heard something that made his body stiffen, a child's plea, laden with anguish, echoing through the silent corridors. "Please, Mommy, I don't want to do this." The sentence came from a room on the lower floor. Descending a few steps and looking towards the living room, he saw his daughter kneeling on the floor, scrubbing the white marble with evident effort, using a soaked cloth. Her eyes were red and swollen, and her small hands were irritated from contact with cleaning products. Pacing around her, Beatrice watched with a rigid posture, in absolute silence. The impact of that scene resonated deeply within Robert, though he said nothing in that moment. He just watched, stunned. Beatrice, upon noticing his presence, quickly adopted a maternal tone, explaining that this was just a lesson in domestic responsibility, something children Julia's age needed to learn to value the work of others and take care of their things. Her words sounded sweet, well-rehearsed, coherent enough to leave anyone in doubt. Julia, however, kept her eyes downcast. There was no customary hug between father and daughter, only a palpable tension in the air. In the following days, Robert began to notice details he had previously ignored. He realized how Julia asked for permission for simple things, like drinking water or going to the garden to play. He observed that the girl avoided eating meals in his presence, and that the toys in her room seemed untouched, like decorative pieces. When he questioned Beatrice, she always had ready justifications. "Julia is going through a difficult phase. The school psychologist has already warned about regressive behaviors. She misses her mother. It's normal." Despite being busy with his business commitments, Robert could no longer ignore the alarm bell that had gone off inside him. He discreetly sought out a trusted old acquaintance in the field of child welfare, Deborah Evans, a social worker with vast experience in delicate cases. Deborah knew the hidden realities of Manhattan's elite families and was aware that beneath layers of appearances, stories of neglect, psychological pressure, and emotional abuse often lay hidden. When Deborah visited the Miller residence without prior notice, she was received cordially by Beatrice, who maintained an impeccable demeanor, from her elegant appearance to her articulate speech. She stated that Julia was an extremely sensitive child with a tendency to create fantasies, and that any strange behavior was likely the result of unresolved trauma from the loss of her biological mother. Julia was brought into the living room wearing a perfectly ironed pink dress and her hair carefully styled with matching ribbons. There was something artificial in the girl's posture, as if every movement had been rehearsed beforehand. Deborah, with her professional experience, picked up on the silent cry for help behind those large brown eyes. In Julia's room, decorated like a scene from a children's decor magazine, the social worker immediately noticed the artificiality. The toys were too clean, arranged as if in a store window. The smell of cleaning products was overwhelming. Deborah asked if she could see her drawings, and the girl, hesitant, pulled a hidden notebook from under the mattress. The colorful drawings seemed innocent at first glance, but soon revealed troubling patterns. A small figure, isolated in large empty spaces, other figures with threatening expressions, and blue tears streaming from disproportionately large eyes. From that moment on, the investigation took on a more serious dimension. Deborah tried to speak with the household staff, but met with resistance. The housekeeper, recently hired, was evasive in her answers. The driver practically refused to speak. Only Anthony, the elderly gardener with a gentle voice and kind eyes, risked saying that Julia spent hours locked in her room and that he rarely saw her smile since the new madam had arrived at the house. Weeks later, he would be dismissed under the pretext of restructuring of domestic services. While Deborah gathered reports and evidence, Robert insisted that Beatrice allow their daughter more freedom. But he was always convinced by seemingly reasonable arguments. Beatrice claimed to be concerned about the girl's emotional balance, who had supposedly had outbursts in class and invented stories for her teacher. Shortly after, without any prior consultation with Robert, Julia was transferred to a new school. According to Beatrice, a more structured and disciplined environment would be better. The situation reached a critical point when, on one of the days scheduled for a psychological evaluation, Julia simply disappeared. The school reported that her stepmother had picked the child up early. Deborah alerted Child Protective Services, and Robert, pressured by doubt and guilt, decided to discreetly install a new security system in the house, under the pretext of an upgrade. Cameras and microphones were strategically placed in the main areas: the hallway, the living room, the kitchen, places where Julia and Beatrice normally interacted. It was one of these recordings that completely changed the course of events. One late afternoon, while Robert pretended to be in an important meeting, the system recorded a conversation in which Beatrice, with a seemingly calm voice, told the girl that if she continued telling lies to strangers, she would be sent to an institution where children with problems in their heads were kept away from their families. Julia apologized repeatedly, and promised to stop making a drama. The recording was clear, disturbing, and impossible to refute. From that moment on, the case went from being a mere suspicion to a formal complaint. The content was presented to the competent authorities, and a protection order was requested from the family court. The story, until then confined to the corridors of the judicial system, reached the press through investigative journalist Matthew Grant, who obtained access to Julia's drawings and the social worker's reports. The repercussion was immediate in major media outlets. Newspapers and television programs began to question the perfect image of elite families, and New York society started to see Beatrice not as a philanthropic lady, but as a woman surrounded by grave suspicions. Julia was temporarily placed in a specialized institution, away from the spotlight and manipulation. She underwent medical evaluations, recreational activities, and intensive psychological support. The girl who once lived in silence gradually began to express her feelings through art and words. Deborah, who visited her frequently, became a point of security in her new routine. Meanwhile, Beatrice moved behind the scenes. She accused Deborah of unethical conduct, tried to discredit the professionals involved in the case, and sought support among her influential contacts. But the narrative was no longer under her control. Robert, finally awakened to reality, not only acknowledged his own negligence, but also stood firmly by his daughter's side. Willing to face all consequences, he would become a key player in the process that would define Julia's future and reveal the true face of his stepmother. However, this story was still far from its end. Appearances continued to hide deeper and darker truths that only time would reveal. In the Upper East Side townhouse, now silent and empty, the mirrors on the walls reflected a reality that no one could ignore anymore. In the drawers of Robert's office, old documents held secrets that would soon come to light. In Beatrice's jewelry box, among diamonds and pearls, A small object seemed out of place, an old key, carefully hidden. That would open doors long closed in that family's history. Deborah Evans knew her investigation had only scratched the surface. As she organized her reports on a rainy night in her East Village apartment, her phone rang. On the other end of the line, the voice of an unknown woman made a revelation that would completely change the course of the investigation. "My name is Christina Hayes. I was the housekeeper at the Miller house 5 years ago. I have information about Beatrice that you need to know. This isn't the first time she's done this." That call would be just the beginning of a series of discoveries that no one could have foreseen. Beatrice's past held secrets far darker than anyone could imagine. Meanwhile, in a simple room at the Foster Institution, Julia drew compulsively. In her new drawings, a figure repeatedly appeared that no one could identify, a woman with long hair who watched her from a distance, through a window. When asked who she was, the girl would only reply with a whisper, "The real one." The truth, as everyone would soon discover, was far more complex and surprising than anyone could have suspected. The morning sun timidly illuminated the small East Village apartment where Deborah Evans had spent a sleepless night analyzing documents. The call from Christina Hayes, the former housekeeper of the Miller family, had opened a door to a past that Beatrice had carefully tried to erase. Armed with a recorder and a notepad, Deborah prepared for a meeting that could completely change the course of the investigation. The cafe in Midtown Manhattan was almost empty at that hour. In a discreet corner, a woman of about 50 waited nervously, stirring a spoon in her already cold cup. Christina Hayes seemed to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders. When Deborah approached and identified herself, the former housekeeper looked around, as if afraid of being watched. "I worked for the family for 5 years. I was there even before Beatrice arrived," Christina began in a low voice. "At first I thought it was just her way, you know, a perfectionist, demanding. But then—" She paused, taking a deep breath. "Then I realized there was something wrong with the way she treated the girl when no one was looking." Christina recounted disturbing episodes: meals denied as punishment, Julia's personal belongings mysteriously disappearing, long periods of isolation in her room. "The last straw was when I found the girl locked in the basement, crying. Beatrice said it was a game of hide-and-seek that had gotten out of hand. But I saw the terror in that child's eyes. The next day, I was fired." What was most alarming, however, was what Christina revealed next. Before working for the Millers, Beatrice had been married to a businessman from Greenwich, Connecticut, Edward Campbell, who had a young daughter from a previous relationship. I heard rumors among the older staff that his daughter had suffered a mysterious accident and ended up hospitalized. Shortly after, the marriage ended, and Beatrice came to New York, where she met Robert. That information was the missing link. Deborah immediately contacted sources in Greenwich to verify Beatrice's history in that city. While waiting for a response, she decided to visit Julia at the Foster Institution. The New Dawn Welcome Center occupied a renovated old brownstone in Brooklyn. Unlike traditional orphanages, the place had a welcoming atmosphere, with colorful walls and large spaces for recreational activities. Julia was in the garden when Deborah arrived, focused on a drawing. Her hair, now in a simple braid, framed a face that seemed more relaxed, though it still bore the marks of her experience. "Hello, Julia. Can I see what you're drawing?" The girl hesitated for a moment, but then turned the paper towards Deborah. It was a house, different from the townhouse where she lived. A simpler house, with a garden full of flowers and a large tree. Next to the house were 3 figures, a small one, clearly representing Julia herself, and 2 adult figures. One was easily identifiable as Robert. The other— "Who is this person here with you and your father?" Deborah asked gently. Julia looked at the drawing for a long moment before answering. "The real mommy? You mean your biological mother, Marianne?" The girl shook her head. "No, the other one." Before Deborah could ask more questions, the center's psychologist at DSAS, Dr. Louise Morgan, approached and asked to speak with her privately. In the professional's cozy office, Deborah was informed about Julia's therapy sessions. "She has repeatedly mentioned this real mommy," Dr. Morgan explained. "Initially, we thought it was a reference to her biological mother, but the description doesn't match the photos of Marianne we've seen. Moreover, Julia insists that this person has been in her life recently, not in the past. Do you think it could be an imaginary figure? Some kind of defense mechanism? Deborah asked. Considering the history of emotional abuse, it would be understandable. However, there's a consistency in her accounts that intrigues me. She describes very specific details: the smell of a certain perfume, a silver bracelet with colorful charms, a particular lullaby. These are very concrete elements for a purely imaginary figure. That conversation left Deborah deep in thought. As she left the center, she received a call from her contact in Greenwich. The information was explosive. Beatrice Campbell, now known as Beatrice Miller, had indeed been married to Edward Campbell, a businessman in the financial sector. His daughter, Sophia, then 6 years old, had been hospitalized after a suspicious fall down the stairs. Although doctors had raised suspicions of neglect or even abuse, nothing was formally proven. The marriage ended soon after Sapuan, with an out-of-court settlement that included a confidentiality clause. It was a pattern. Deborah needed to alert Robert immediately. She tried calling him repeatedly, but all calls went to voicemail. She then decided to go to his office in Manhattan's financial district in person. Miller Tech occupied 3 floors of a modern office building on Wall Street. Deborah was informed by the receptionist that Robert was in a meeting with lawyers and could not be disturbed. While she waited, she noticed the unusual bustle of employees and the tense atmosphere in the office. Something important was happening. After nearly 2 hours of waiting, Robert finally appeared in the lobby. He looked worn out, with dark circles under his eyes and the serious expression that had characterized the last few days. Upon seeing Deborah, he waved for her to follow him to his private office. "Sorry for the wait. Things are complicated," he said, closing the door. "Beatrice has filed for a restraining order against me, claiming I invented this whole story to keep her away from Julia. She's managed to get statements from witnesses who claim she was always an exemplary stepmother and that I have problems with alcohol and workaholism." Deborah wasn't surprised by the counterattack strategy. It was typical of abusers to try to reverse the roles and present themselves as victims. "Robert, I've discovered very serious information about Beatrice's past. She's done this before, with another child, in Greenwich." As she recounted what she had discovered, Robert's expression transformed from shock to something more complex, a mixture of anger and a strange kind of recognition, as if pieces of a puzzle were finally falling into place. "That explains a lot," he muttered, opening a drawer and taking out a folder. "I found these documents in our home safe. They're copies of regular bank transfers Beatrice makes to a clinic in the Berkshires. Initially, I thought they were donations to some charity, part of her philanthropic work, but now the documents showed substantial monthly transfers to a clinic called the Misty Mountain Institute, which publicly presented itself as a luxury spa and wellness center, but which a quick online search revealed was also a discreet psychiatric clinic catering to high-net-worth patients. "We need to find out who's being held there," Deborah said, "and we need to do it quickly." The plan was drawn up that same afternoon. Robert would use his contacts in the business world to get information about the clinic, while Deborah would continue investigating Beatrice's past in Greenwich. In parallel, they would intensify their visits to Julia to try to understand who this real mommy was that appeared in her drawings and stories. The next day, Deborah received an unexpected call. It was Francesca Cole, a social worker in Greenwich, who had found surprising information in the local Child Protective Services files. "You're not going to believe what I found," Francesca said, her voice agitated. "Edward Campbell, Beatrice's ex-husband, had a sister named Amanda. She was living with them temporarily at the time of the accident with Sophia. According to archived statements, Amanda had raised suspicions about Beatrice's behavior with her niece, but no one listened because she had a history of emotional instability. After the incident and the divorce, Amanda completely disappeared off the radar." "Do you have a photo of this Amanda?" Deborah asked, feeling she was close to a major revelation. "I'm emailing it to you right now. And there's one more thing. Amanda was a children's music teacher and, according to the reports, had a very close relationship with Sophia." When the photo arrived, Deborah felt a chill run down her spine. The woman in the picture had long, wavy hair and was wearing a silver bracelet with colorful charms, exactly like the figure Julia described as the real mommy. Meanwhile, in the now empty townhouse on the Upper East Side, Beatrice was frantically rummaging through drawers and closets. She seemed to be looking for something specific, something important that she couldn't leave behind or let fall into the wrong hands. In the master suite, she opened a secret compartment at the back of the closet and removed a small carved wooden box. Inside, among documents and personal items, was a flash drive. She connected it to her laptop and quickly checked the contents, seeming satisfied to confirm that all the files were still there. Her phone rang, interrupting her search. It was her lawyer, Paul Mason, with worrying news. "Beatrice, the situation is getting complicated. I just heard they're investigating your past in Greenwich. If they find out about Sophia and the agreement with Edward, our strategy could fall apart." "They can't prove anything," she replied with calculated coldness. "That agreement is ironclad with confidentiality clauses. Edward would never talk. He has too much to lose." "And what about his sister, Amanda?" Beatrice's momentary silence was telling. "Amanda is not a threat," she finally said. "Trust me." After hanging up, Beatrice made another call, this time to a number not listed in her contacts. "We need to move up the plans," she said, without identifying herself. "The transfer needs to happen tonight. No, we can't wait any longer. It's getting dangerous." At the clinic in the Berkshires, head nurse Claudia Rogers was receiving unusual instructions from the medical director. A patient was to be transferred to another facility that very night. Outside of normal protocol, the paperwork would be arranged later. The patient's name, Amanda Campbell, admitted almost 5 years ago under a diagnosis of persistent delusional disorder. Claudia had worked at the institution for decades and knew the procedures well, and the exceptions made for patients whose families had enough influence. Amanda was one of those special patients, kept in a private room in the most isolated wing of the institute. Few staff had access to her, and visits were practically non-existent. The only person who regularly checked on her status was Mrs. Beatrice Miller, who presented herself as her sister-in-law and legal guardian. What intrigued Claudia, however, was that Amanda didn't seem to match the diagnosis in her records. On the rare occasions she was able to interact with her, the patient appeared lucid, coherent, albeit deeply melancholic. She always asked about a girl named Sophia, and more recently mentioned another child named Julia. That night, something about the urgent transfer request aroused the nurse's suspicion even more. Seizing a moment when her colleagues were distracted, Claudia entered Amanda's room. "They're transferring you tonight," she said in a low voice. "I don't know where, but it doesn't seem like a regular procedure." Amanda looked at her with surprising intensity. "It's her. Beatrice knows they're discovering the truth." Her voice, though quiet, had a clarity that contrasted with the image of a severe psychiatric patient. "Please, I need someone to contact Robert Miller in New York. Tell him his daughter Julia is in danger. Tell him I know what Beatrice did to Sophia, and now she's going to do the same to Julia." "Who are you really?" Claudia asked, confused by this sudden lucidity and information. "I'm a music teacher. I lived with my brother Edward, his daughter Sophia, and his then-wife Beatrice. I noticed Sophia was being psychologically abused by Beatrice when no one was looking. When I confronted my brother, Beatrice convinced everyone I was having persecutory delusions. Then came the accident. Sophia fell down the stairs or was pushed. I never knew for sure. When I started asking uncomfortable questions, I was admitted for a temporary evaluation. That was almost 5 years ago." The story was fantastical, but something in Amanda's eyes conveyed a truth that Claudia could not ignore. She made an impulsive decision, but one she knew was right. "I'm going to help you get out of here." In New York, Robert finally received the information about the Misty Mountain Institute. His contact, a former medical school classmate who now held an important position in the State Department of Health, had sent a list of patients admitted over the last 5 years. Among them, one name stood out: Amanda Campbell, admitted for persistent delusional disorder with persecutory ideations, with Beatrice Miller as her legal guardian. It made no sense. Why would Beatrice be the legal guardian of someone seemingly unrelated to her? Unless… Suddenly, a light went on in Robert's mind. He quickly searched his personal files for his wedding album with Beatrice. In one of the photos, taken during the reception, Beatrice was talking to a woman he hadn't been able to identify at the time. Zooming in on the image on his computer, he recognized the face. It was the same Amanda Campbell from the photo Francesca had sent. They already knew each other, Robert murmured, feeling a chill down his spine. He picked up the phone and urgently dialed Deborah. "I've just discovered something unbelievable. Amanda has been held in a psychiatric clinic in the Berkshires for almost 5 years, with Beatrice as her legal guardian." "That's impossible," Deborah replied, equally shocked. Amanda was Beatrice's sister-in-law in Greenwich. Why would she be her legal guardian after the divorce from Edward? Unless there's something we're not seeing. Some reason for Beatrice to want to keep her isolated and under control. Like an inconvenient witness, Deborah completed. Someone who saw what really happened to Sophia. At that exact moment, Robert's phone indicated another call. It was an unknown number from the Berkshires. He hesitated for a moment, but something compelled him to answer. "Mr. Miller, my name is Claudia Rogers. I'm a nurse at the Misty Mountain Institute. I have someone here who needs to speak with you urgently." The voice that came next left Robert breathless. "Mr. Miller, you don't know me, but I know everything about your daughter Julia and the woman you married. My name is Amanda Campbell, and Beatrice has held me prisoner for almost 5 years, so I couldn't reveal what she did to my niece Sophia. Please, believe me, your daughter is in danger." Meanwhile, at the foster institution, Julia woke up startled in the middle of the night. She had had another nightmare about the figure she called the Mean Lady. In recent days, her drawings had become increasingly dark, with the threatening figure growing in size and presence. What no one knew was that same night, an unexpected visitor had arrived at the New Dawn Center. An elegant woman, introducing herself as a representative from the family court, requested an emergency visit to the minor Julia Miller. With apparently official documents and an authoritarian demeanor, she gained access to the premises. Only the night security guard, and new on the job, was present at the reception at that late hour. When the night shift caregiver went to check on Julia's room after hearing a noise, she found the window open and the bed empty. The girl had disappeared. The alarm blared through the New York dawn. The New Dawn Center instantly transformed into a chaos of lit rooms and alarmed voices. The director, Martha Oliveira, arrived breathless, still in her pajamas under a hastily thrown-on coat. Her face paled as she confirmed the news. Julia Miller had disappeared. How was this possible? Who authorized a visit at this hour? She demanded, reviewing the security camera footage. The recording clearly showed an elegant woman, her dark hair in a severe bun, presenting documents to the night guard. Her posture exuded authority, but her face remained strategically turned away from the camera. "I thought it was standard procedure," the young guard justified himself, visibly shaken. She had official documents from the family court, mentioned an emergency transfer. Child Protective Services was immediately alerted, followed by the NYPD and the family court itself. Deborah Evans was notified around 3 in the morning and headed to the location without even changing her clothes. Upon arrival, she found Robert Miller already there, his face contorted with indescribable anguish. "It was Beatrice," he stated with grim certainty. "She found out we were about to find Amanda and acted first." "But how could she get documents from the family court?" Deborah questioned. "Money, influence, contacts." Beatrice always knew how to get what she wanted. Robert looked as if he had aged 10 years in a single night. And now she has Julia. As the authorities organized roadblocks on the main exits of the city, Robert received a call on his private cell phone. It was an unknown number. "If you want to see your daughter again, come alone to the helipad of the Crescent Hotel. You have 30 minutes. No police, no tracking." "Just you." The unfamiliar male voice hung up before he could reply. Robert stood paralyzed for a few seconds, the phone still in his hand. His mind frantically calculated the possibilities. Alerting the authorities meant following protocols, investigations that would take precious time that Julia might not have. On the other hand, meeting the demand was to risk walking into a trap. "I have to go," he said abruptly to Deborah. "A company emergency came up." She immediately saw through the lie. "Robert, what's going on? Did you get a call?" "I can't talk right now. Trust me." Before Deborah could stop him, Robert was already in his car, speeding down the FDR drive towards the iconic hotel with its unmistakable architecture. The clock read 3:47 a.m. when he parked at the designated spot. The helipad, on top of the crescent-shaped building, was lit only by emergency lights. There was no sign of a helicopter or anyone else. Robert checked his watch. He was still 10 minutes early. He walked slowly across the open space, exposed to the cold New York dawn wind. Suddenly, he heard the characteristic sound of an approaching helicopter. The aircraft landed with precision, and from the door emerged a middle-aged man, formally dressed, whom Robert recognized immediately: Paul Mason, Beatrice's lawyer. "Get in," Paul ordered, pointing to the helicopter. "We don't have much time." "Where is my daughter?" "Safe for now, but that can change depending on your cooperation." Inside the helicopter, another man waited, the pilot, who didn't turn to look at him. As soon as Robert boarded, the aircraft took off quickly. Through the window, the lights of New York City faded behind them as they headed towards the mountains. "Where are we going?" Robert asked, trying to remain calm. "On to a place where we can resolve this situation like civilized people," Paul replied with an artificial smile. "Beatrice has always preferred direct negotiations." After nearly an hour of flight, the helicopter began to descend in a remote area near the Berkshires, an isolated mansion, surrounded by high walls and dense Appalachian forest, emerged from the mountain mist. On the illuminated patio, Robert could see 2 luxury cars with tinted windows parked. As soon as the helicopter landed, Paul led him inside the residence. The decor was sophisticated, but the atmosphere felt rarely inhabited, a vacation home or an occasional retreat. Beatrice was waiting in the main living room, sitting elegantly in a leather armchair, as if she were receiving guests for a social event. "Robert, darling," she said, with disconcerting cordiality. "What a regrettable situation, isn't it? None of this needed to happen if you had just trusted me from the beginning. Where is Julia?" Robert's voice trembled with restrained anger. "Our daughter is resting. The poor child has been so confused by all these accusations, all this unnecessary drama." Beatrice sighed theatrically. "I had to intervene before you traumatized her further with these absurd investigations. Our daughter. You never considered her your daughter. You used her just like you used Sophia before her." The mention of that name made Beatrice's eyes harden for a moment, before she reassumed her mask of serenity. "I see you've been digging into my past. That wasn't very kind of you." "I know about Amanda too," Robert continued, deciding to take a risk. "I know you kept her locked up all these years, so she couldn't tell the truth about what happened to Sophia." For the first time, Beatrice seemed genuinely surprised. Her composure faltered for an instant. "Amanda escaped from the clinic last night," Robert pressed on, watching her reaction closely. "She's on her way to New York right now, ready to tell the authorities everything." It was a bluff, but it worked. Beatrice stood up abruptly, her face contorted into an expression Robert had never seen before, a mixture of fury and panic. Impossible. She couldn't have... Beatrice cut herself off, realizing too late that she had fallen into the trap. She quickly recomposed herself. "It doesn't matter. No one would believe the stories of a woman diagnosed with persecutory delusions." "And what about Marianne, my first wife? Did you have something to do with her passing, too?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Beatrice smiled, a cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Marianne was too fragile for this world. You know that. That mysterious illness that consumed her so quickly. So convenient, don't you think? It left the way clear for me. And a precious little girl without a mother, desperately in need of firm guidance." Robert felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. The implications of that veiled confession were too monstrous to process at that moment. He focused on the immediate goal, finding Julia. "What's your proposal?" "Beatrice, why did you bring me here? Simple. We start over. You drop all the charges, fire that meddling social worker, and we go back to being the perfect family we were. You have your business, I have my social standing, and Julia learns to behave properly." And if I refuse? Beatrice shrugged with studied elegance. Accidents happen. Robert. Disobedient children run away from home. Stressed-out businessmen commit suicide after family tragedies. They're sad stories, but they happen every day. At that moment, a sound from the upper floor caught both their attention. A child was crying. "Julia!" Robert ran towards the stairs, but was stopped by two burly men who emerged from a side door. "Not so fast," Paul Mason intervened. "First, we need to formalize our agreement." Meanwhile, in New York, Deborah Evans had wasted no time after Robert's abrupt departure. Using her contacts in the police, she managed to track the approximate location of his cell phone before the signal disappeared. The last ping came from the area of the Crescent Hotel. Arriving at the location and confirming Robert's car in the parking lot, Deborah understood her suspicions were correct. He had received some kind of communication related to Julia's whereabouts. The hotel security confirmed seeing an unscheduled helicopter land and take off quickly from the helipad around 4 a.m. Deborah immediately contacted Detective Charles Fernandez of the Missing Persons Squad, with whom she had worked on other cases. "We need a warrant to track any property registered in Beatrice Miller's name or her company's," Deborah explained, "especially in the Berkshires region." "Why the Berkshires specifically?" the detective asked. "Because that's where the Misty Mountain Institute is, where Beatrice kept Amanda Campbell for 5 years. It's an area she knows well, where she has connections." While they awaited the judicial warrant, Deborah received a call that would completely change the course of events. It was Claudia Rogers, the nurse from the institute. "We made it. We're on our way to New York," she said, her voice breaking up due to the poor reception on the mountain road. "Amanda is with me. She knows where Beatrice might have taken the girl." "Where are you exactly?" "Passing through Albany. We took the first bus we could find after leaving the clinic." "There's an isolated property near the border with Massachusetts," Amanda said, taking the phone. "Beatrice mentioned it a few times during her visits when she thought I was too sedated to pay attention. A place called the Mountain Refuge E. That information was the trigger for a joint operation between the NYPD and Child Protective Services. Within hours, a police helicopter was circling the area indicated by Amanda, while patrol cars were strategically positioned on the access roads. At the mansion, oblivious to this movement, Robert was facing the most difficult moment of his life. Before him, a contract prepared by Paul Mason laid out draconian terms. He would relinquish custody of Julia, drop all charges against Beatrice, and transfer 40% of his company shares to her name as compensation for moral damages. "Sign, and you can see your daughter on alternate weekends. Under supervision, of course," Beatrice instructed with a victorious smile. "Refuse, and you will never see her again." Julia's cries, now closer, tore at Robert's heart. The girl had been brought to the top of the stairs by one of Beatrice's security guards. A woman with a severe expression. Julia looked exhausted and terrified. "Daddy!" she cried, trying to break free from the firm grip on her arm. "It's okay, sweetheart," Robert replied, trying to sound calm despite the situation. "Everything's going to be okay." Beatrice watched the scene with satisfaction. "See? We're a family. We just need to establish some clear rules about who's in charge." It was at that exact moment that the sound of the police helicopter broke the silence of the mountain morning. The lights of patrol cars became visible on the access road, and voices amplified by megaphones ordered everyone to stay where they were. Beatrice's face twisted into a mask of fury. "You tricked me?" she accused, advancing towards Robert. In the ensuing moment of confusion, with security guards running to check the entrances and Paul Mason desperately trying to contact allies on his phone, Julia managed to break free. The girl ran down the stairs, straight into her father's arms. Beatrice, seeing her plan crumble, made a drastic decision. She quickly grabbed a small handgun hidden in a side-table drawer. "If I can't have her, no one will." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Beatrice pointed the gun towards Julia and Robert. Her finger moved to the trigger. At that precise moment, the front door was breached, and police officers stormed the room, followed by Deborah Evans. "Police! Drop the weapon!" Beatrice hesitated for a fraction of a second. just long enough for one of the officers to tackle her. The gun clattered to the marble floor, unfired. As Beatrice was handcuffed, screaming threats and incoherent accusations, Robert held Julia tightly, as if afraid she might disappear again at any moment. Deborah approached them, checking if they were hurt. "How did you find us so quickly?" Robert asked, still stunned by the turn of events. "Amanda," Deborah replied simply. "She's outside in the police car. She's the one who led us here." Upon hearing that name, Julia lifted her tear-streaked face, an expression of recognition surprising everyone. "The real mommy?" the girl asked, her voice trembling with hope. Robert and Deborah exchanged confused glances. How could Julia know Amanda if they had never met? When they exited the mansion, a woman was waiting beside a police car. Although years of confinement had left their mark, her face paler, her body thinner than in the photos, her eyes shone with an unmistakable intensity. She wore a silver bracelet with colorful charms on her right wrist. Julia, upon seeing her, let go of her father's arms and ran towards her. "You came, you really came." Amanda knelt, hugging the child carefully, as if afraid of breaking her. Tears streamed freely down her face. "Yes, little one. I promised I'd come back, didn't I?" The scene left everyone perplexed. How was it possible that Julia and Amanda knew each other? The answer began to emerge when the girl, still in Amanda's arms, explained with the simplicity of childhood. "She used to visit me in secret when the mean lady was out. She sang to me and told me stories about another girl who needed to be strong." The pieces of the puzzle finally began to fit. Amanda revealed that, over the past 5 years, Beatrice would occasionally remove her from the clinic for experimental treatments, in reality, to keep her under direct surveillance at specific times. On some of these occasions, she was taken to the Miller townhouse, always kept sedated and isolated in a room at the back of the property. "One of those times, about a year ago, the medication failed," Amanda explained. "I woke up confused, but lucid enough to realize where I was. I heard a child crying and, following the sound, found Julia locked in her room, alone and scared. Beatrice had gone to a charity event, and the nanny was busy in another part of the house." Amanda then began to secretly visit Julia during these periods of forced lucidity, establishing a connection that would become the only bright spot in the girl's lonely life. She sang the same lullabies she used to sing to Sophia, told stories that conveyed courage and hope, and promised that one day she would return to save her. "I never imagined I would actually succeed," Amanda confessed, her voice choked with emotion. "But when Claudia helped me escape and mentioned the name Julia Miller, I knew it was my chance to keep that promise." On the way back to New York, Julia fell asleep in the back of the patrol car, exhausted by the traumatic events. Robert, still processing the day's revelations, watched his daughter with a mixture of relief and guilt. "How could I not see what was happening right under my nose?" he lamented. "Abusers like Beatrice are masters of manipulation," Deborah replied. "They build flawless facades and gradually isolate their victims. You saw what she wanted you to see. The important thing is that you finally saw the truth," Amanda added. "Many never get to that point. My own brother refused to believe, even after what happened to Sophia." The mention of her niece brought a shadow to Amanda's face. "I need to find her." After the accident, Edward sent her to a boarding school in Switzerland, away from everything and everyone. Beatrice convinced him it would be better for her. Recovery. "I'll help you," Robert promised. "After everything you've done for Julia, it's the least I can do." Meanwhile, at the Child and Adolescent Protection Division, Beatrice Miller was facing a rigorous interrogation. Her empire of lies was crumbling fast. Her lawyer, Paul Mason, had quickly negotiated his own immunity in exchange for revealing details of the scheme, including forged documents and bribes to court officials. Even more surprising was the discovery made at the Mountain Mansion, a laptop containing detailed files not only on Amanda and Sophia, but also on other wealthy families with young children. Beatrice had methodically researched widowed or divorced businessmen with children, selecting her targets with surgical precision. "It was a pattern," explained Detective Louise Peterson at a press conference days later, without identifying the individuals directly. She would approach men in vulnerable positions, emotionally fragile from a recent loss, With young children and considerable wealth, she would quickly establish a relationship of trust and, after formalizing the union, begin a systematic process of alienation between father and child. The case, which initially seemed like an isolated family drama, turned out to be much broader and more disturbing. Subsequent investigations would connect Beatrice to at least 3 other similar situations before Edward Campbell and Robert Miller, though in none of them had she managed to finalize a marriage. For Julia, however, the future finally looked promising. After intensive psychological evaluations, she showed surprising resilience, largely attributed to the secret connection she had maintained with Amanda during those difficult years. 2 weeks after the dramatic rescue, Robert organized a small picnic in Central Park. The day was sunny, perfect for a new beginning. Julia ran across the lawn, chasing soap bubbles that Amanda blew into the air. Her laughter, genuine and carefree, was a sound Robert had feared he would never hear again. "She's recovering so well," commented Deborah, who continued to follow the case as a social worker. "Children have an incredible capacity for healing when they receive the right support." "I still can't believe everything that's happened," Robert confessed, watching his daughter play. "How did Beatrice manage to deceive so many people for so long?" "Emotional predators like her thrive in environments where appearances matter more than the truth," Deborah replied. "Twice they count on our desire to believe the most convenient version of reality." At that moment, Julia came running back to them, her cheeks flushed with excitement. In her hands, a small, colorful drawing, 3 figures holding hands under a large yellow sun. "Look, Daddy, it's us, you, me, and Aunt Amanda." Robert smiled, feeling an emotion he could barely contain. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Can we hang it on the living room wall?" The girl nodded enthusiastically before returning to her games. Amanda approached, sitting beside them on the checkered blanket spread on the grass. "I heard from Sophia," she said, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "The boarding school has agreed to allow a visit next month. Edward is still resistant to the idea of bringing her back, but it's a start." "We'll go with you if you like," Robert offered. "And I think it would be good for Julia to meet someone who's been through similar experiences." Amanda smiled, moved by the gesture. "Thank you. That would mean a lot to me. And probably to Sophia, too." As they talked about future plans, none of them noticed the figure watching them from a distance, partially hidden by a large tree. Christina Hayes, the former housekeeper who had provided the first crucial clues in the case, smiled with satisfaction upon seeing the result of her courage. Without drawing attention, she slowly walked away, disappearing among the park-goers. Some stories, after all, do have happy endings, not because evil disappears completely, but because the truth, however painful, paves the way for healing. For Julia, that journey was just beginning, but for the first time in a long time, the path ahead seemed illuminated by the promise of better days. On the New York skyline, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees, as if nature itself was celebrating this hard-won moment of peace. Tomorrow would be a new day, with new challenges, but also new possibilities. And for that small, newly formed family, that was all that mattered. 6 months had passed since Julia's dramatic rescue. Spring had arrived in New York, transforming the gardens of Central Park into explosions of color and fragrance. On a wooden bench under the leafy canopies of ancient trees, Amanda watched Julia, playing with other children. The girl was almost unrecognizable, not physically, but in spirit. Her eyes, once fearful and vigilant, now shone with the vivacity of childhood. Her body, once always tense and restrained, moved with freedom and joy. "It's incredible how she's recovered," commented Deborah, sitting beside Amanda. The social worker continued to follow the case, now more as a family friend than a professional. "Children are amazing," Amanda replied, without taking her eyes off Julia. "They have this innate ability to move forward when they receive the right support." Amanda's phone vibrated. It was a message from Robert, letting her know he was on his way with the snacks he had promised to pick up. Over the past few months, a comfortable routine had settled in among the 3 of them. Amanda, with nowhere to stay after years of forced confinement, had accepted Robert's invitation to temporarily occupy the guest apartment of the new home he had bought. A much more modest house than the old mansion, but infinitely more welcoming. The relationship between them had grown naturally, initially based on gratitude and the common goal of protecting Julia, but evolving into something deeper. Still not fully defined, there was a mutual respect, a silent understanding that they both needed time, he to process the devastating betrayal he had suffered, she to rebuild a life that had been stolen from her for 5 years. "How are the preparations for the trip going?" Deborah asked. Amanda smiled, a mix of anxiety and anticipation in her eyes. "Almost everything is ready. We leave next week for Zurich. Edward finally agreed to let me see Sophia, so though he still insists on being present during our meetings." The mention of her brother brought a momentary shadow to her face. Edward Campbell, after years of believing Beatrice's manipulations, had finally been confronted with irrefutable evidence of what had really happened to his daughter and his sister. Even so, he resisted fully accepting his share of the blame, preferring to keep Sophia at the Swiss boarding school for her protection. "He's still processing everything," Amanda continued. "I think the guilt is simply too overwhelming to face all at once." "And what about you? How are you feeling about seeing Sophia again after so long?" Amanda took a deep breath, organizing thoughts that had kept her awake for the past few nights. Terrified, excited, hopeful. She was 6 when we were separated. Now she's 11. "We've lost so many precious moments, but you'll have the chance to create new ones," Deborah reminded her gently. Julia spotted Robert's arrival before he even came into their line of sight. With a cry of joy, she ran towards the park entrance, where he was walking with a paper bag containing the promised sandwiches and juices. The smile that lit up his face upon seeing his daughter was a testament to the transformation that had also occurred in his life. "Sorry for the delay," Robert said, approaching the women after hugging Julia. The line at the deli was huge. As he handed out the snacks, Robert seemed particularly cheerful, as if he were holding on to some important news. Deborah noticed, and, after a few minutes of casual conversation, decided to give them some privacy. "I need to meet Louise to sort out some details about the new welcome center," she excused herself, referring to the psychologist who was now working with her on a project for children who were victims of emotional abuse. When they were alone, Julia had returned to playing with her new friends. Robert handed Amanda an official-looking envelope. "This arrived this morning. I thought you'd want to open it." With slightly trembling fingers, Amanda removed the documents. Her eyes quickly scanned the information, widening in surprise. "It's the final report from the civil inquiry," Robert explained. "All charges against you have been officially dropped, and the independent medical evaluation has certified that you never had any psychiatric condition that would justify institutionalization. The falsified records have all been identified." Amanda closed her eyes for a moment, a single tear escaping down her cheek. 5 years of her life had been stolen by a carefully constructed lie. No official document could ever fully compensate for that, but it represented at least a formal acknowledgement of the injustice she had suffered. "There's more," Robert continued, pointing to the second page. "The judge has ordered compensation to be paid by Beatrice, the Misty Mountain Institute, and the doctors involved in your fraudulent confinement. The amounts mentioned were substantial, enough for Amanda to restart her life on solid ground, without depending on anyone's charity. More important than that, however, was the symbolic meaning, her sanity and dignity officially restored in the eyes of the law." "And what about Beatrice? Any news?" she asked, carefully folding the documents and putting them back in the envelope. Robert's expression hardened subtly. "The trial is set for next month. The defense strategy has changed. They're now claiming a psychological disorder, trying for a hospital commitment instead of prison." "Do you believe that she's sick?" Robert reflected for a moment before answering. "I believe she is calculating and manipulative, not insane. Every action was meticulously planned to maximize her personal gain. That's not madness, it's conscious evil." A few yards away, Julia was laughing as she was pushed on a swing by one of her new friends. The sound, pure and carefree, contrasted with the gravity of the adults' conversation. "I don't want her to have to testify," Amanda commented, watching the girl. She's been through enough trauma. The prosecutor has assured me he'll do everything possible to avoid it. The audio and video recordings we got from the townhouse, along with the testimony from the professionals involved, should be enough." As they talked, Robert discreetly took a small blue velvet box from his pocket, keeping it hidden in his palm. He had been planning the right moment for this gesture for weeks, but always held back, fearing it was too soon. Seeing Amanda there, illuminated by the sun filtering through the leaves, he decided he didn't want to wait any longer. "Amanda, Before he could continue, they were interrupted by the shrill ring of her phone. It was the international number that Amanda recognized immediately, Sophia's boarding school in Switzerland. With an apologetic look at Robert, she answered quickly. The call was brief, but the impact was immense. When she hung up, her face had lost all its color. "What happened?" Robert asked, alarmed. "Sophia?" Amanda's voice trembled. "She's run away from the boarding school. No one has seen her for over 12 hours. JFK Airport was bustling with activity, even at that late hour of the night." Robert, Amanda, and Julia waited at the departure gate, surrounded by hastily packed suitcases. The flight to Zurich would depart in 40 minutes, a bureaucratic miracle achieved through last-minute contacts and considerable financial investment. Julia, sleepy but excited by the unexpected adventure, rested her head on her father's shoulder. The girl had only been told they were taking a surprise trip to meet her cousin Sophia, with no mention of the worrying disappearance. "Daddy, will Sophia like me?" she asked. Yawning. "Of course she will, sweetheart. You two have a lot in common." Amanda paced back and forth, compulsively checking her phone. Since the alert about Sophia's disappearance, she had activated every possible resource: the Swiss police, private investigators, old contacts of Edward's in the country. "Still no news?" Robert asked when she finally sat down beside them. "Nothing conclusive. A cleaning lady thinks she saw her at the Zurich train station, but she's not sure. It's a start. As soon as we land, we'll split up. I've hired a local team to help with the search." Amanda nodded, grateful for Robert's efficiency and support. Amid the chaos of the last few hours, one certainty had solidified in her heart. He was the partner she had never imagined finding, especially after so many years lost in forced isolation. "Thank you," she said simply, covering his hand with hers. "For everything." Robert intertwined his fingers with hers, the small gesture communicating more than words ever could. The velvet box remained in his pocket, waiting for another moment. There would be time for that later, when Sophia was safe. The flight passed with the characteristic slowness of anxious waits. Julia fell asleep almost immediately after takeoff, exhausted by the day's commotion. Amanda, however, couldn't rest. Alternating between mentally reviewing all the possible places a scared child might hide in an unfamiliar city and tormenting herself with the idea that perhaps Sophia wouldn't even recognize her anymore. "What if she doesn't even remember me?" she whispered to Robert in the darkness of the cabin. "She was so little when they took me away. You used to sing to her, didn't you? The same songs you sang to Julia." Amanda nodded, surprised by the question. "Julia never forgot. Even after months without seeing you, she recognized your voice, your scent, your songs. Some connections are simply indelible, Amanda." Those words brought unexpected comfort. Amanda finally drifted into a light sleep, her head resting on Robert's shoulder, their fingers still intertwined. In Zurich, the scene that awaited them was one of controlled tension. Edward Campbell was already at the designated hotel meeting point, visibly worn out after hours of fruitless searching. The reunion between him and Amanda was initially uncomfortable. Decades of hurt and silent accusations hung between the siblings. However, their shared concern for Sophia provided a necessary truce. The investigators got footage of her leaving the central station around 10 a.m. yesterday, Edward reported, showing security camera stills. In them, a girl with dark hair and a green coat walked with determination, as if she had a specific destination in mind. "She looked so purposeful," Amanda observed, "not like someone who ran away aimlessly." "The headmaster mentioned she had been researching New York in recent weeks," Edward added, "using the library computers. They thought it was just curiosity about her American roots." Amanda and Robert exchanged significant looks. Could it be possible that Sophia was trying to get to the United States? The idea seemed absurd. An 11-year-old girl, navigating the international transport system alone. She was always extremely intelligent and observant, Amanda commented. Even at 6, she could memorize routes and names with unusual ease. While the adults discussed the possibilities, Julia, who had been quietly looking at the photos spread on the table, pointed to an almost imperceptible detail. "What's that on her arm?" Everyone leaned over the image. On Sophia's wrist, partially visible under her coat sleeve, something colorful glinted. Amanda gasped in recognition. "It's a charm bracelet, like mine." Edward frowned, confused. "Sophia doesn't wear bracelets. The school doesn't allow adornments outside of special occasions." "This isn't just any bracelet," Amanda explained, instinctively touching her own, which had never left her wrist even during her years of confinement. "It belonged to our mother. I had 2 identical ones. I gave one to Sophia for the last birthday we spent together before—" She didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication was clear. Sophia had kept that connection to her aunt throughout all the years of separation, probably hiding the precious object from the boarding school authorities. "And you were wearing that bracelet when you secretly visited Julia," Robert added, understanding the symbol's importance. Julia, who had been following the conversation with growing interest, suddenly widened her eyes in realization. "The stories! Aunt Amanda, did you tell Sophia the same stories you told me? About the brave girl who found secret paths?" Amanda nodded slowly, recalling the narrative she would improvise to comfort both her niece and, years later, Robert's daughter, tales of a heroine who overcame seemingly insurmountable obstacles with intelligence and perseverance. "Sophia isn't running away aimlessly," Amanda concluded with growing conviction. "She's following a plan. She's trying to find me." The theory began to gain traction when they discovered that the emergency credit card Edward maintained for his daughter had been used to buy a train ticket to Geneva, the city where the headquarters of the American airline in Switzerland was located. "She's definitely trying to get to the States," concluded the investigator hired by Robert. "The question is, how? An unaccompanied minor wouldn't be able to board an international flight without proper documentation and authorization." The answer came in the form of a call from the US consulate in Zurich. Sophia had presented herself there that morning, requesting help to contact her aunt in the United States. The girl's initially confusing story, involving fraudulent psychiatric confinement and an aunt unjustly separated from her, had raised suspicions among the staff, who chose to keep her on the consular premises while they verified the information. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. In less than an hour, the group arrived at the consulate, where Sophia was waiting in a comfortable waiting room, chatting animatedly with a consular assistant who seemed impressed by the young girl's articulation and determination. When Amanda entered the room, time seemed to freeze. Sophia stood up slowly, her eyes fixed on the aunt she hadn't seen in 5 years, but whose face she had never forgotten. In that gaze, there was immediate recognition. "Aunt Amanda." Sophia's voice trembled slightly. Amanda couldn't respond with words. She opened her arms, and Sophia ran into them, melting into a hug that tried to compensate for half a decade of absence. For long minutes, they remained that way, enveloped in a cocoon of reunion, as silent tears traced paths down both their faces. When they finally separated, Sophia noticed Julia, who was shyly watching the scene, holding hands with Robert. The 2 girls studied each other with the natural curiosity of childhood, quickly identifying the traces of shared experiences in each other's eyes. "You're Julia," Sophia stated, not as a question but as a recognition. "Aunt Amanda wrote about you in her letters." "Letters?" Amanda asked, surprised. Sophia smiled, pulling a bundle of carefully folded papers from her backpack. "The lady at the school, Helga, gave them to me in secret. She said a friend sent them for me regularly, but that it had to be our secret." Amanda examined the letters with growing astonishment. They were messages supposedly written by her to Sophia over the years, telling about her life in freedom, her imaginary travels, and, more recently, about a girl named Julia who needed help. "I never wrote these letters," Amanda said, her voice faltering with emotion. "I was institutionalized this whole time." "They were written by me," a female voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned, surprised. There stood Christina Hayes, the former housekeeper, who had provided the first crucial clues in Julia's case. "Christina!" Robert couldn't hide his amazement. "How?" "I worked briefly at the boarding school, where Sophia was. After I left your house," she explained, "I recognized the Campbell surname and made the connection to stories I had heard about Beatrice's past. I couldn't intervene directly, but I could at least offer some comfort. You invented an Aunt Amanda having adventures around the world," Amanda realized, leafing through the letters with reverent care. "At first, yes. Later, when I found out the truth about you, that you were alive, just kept isolated, the letters became a way to keep Sophia's hope alive. And when Julia's case broke in the American press, I realized it was the opportunity to reconnect you. You were the one who mentioned New York in the last letters," deduced Edward, who was following the conversation with a mixture of awe and growing guilt. Christina nodded. "I told Sophia that her aunt had been freed and was now helping a girl named Julia in New York. I never imagined she would take the initiative to run away to find you, but perhaps I should have expected it. She was always extraordinarily determined." Sophia, who had listened intently to the revelation, didn't seem shaken by the discovery that the letters were fictitious. "I always knew, somehow, that they couldn't really be from Aunt Amanda," she confessed, "but they helped me not to lose hope, and when I saw the news about Beatrice Miller on one of the teacher's tablets, I knew it was my chance." There was a moment of respectful silence as everyone processed the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them together in that room. Then Julia, with the direct simplicity of childhood, approached Sophia and took her hand. "Want to be my friend? Aunt Amanda can tell stories to both of us now, the real ones." Sophia smiled, the first genuinely childlike smile Edward had seen on his daughter's face in years. "I'd like that very much." 3 months later, a small celebration was taking place in Amanda's newly renovated apartment in the Greenwich Village neighborhood of New York. The space, bought with part of the compensation she received, had been carefully decorated to reflect her personality. Colorful walls, shelves filled with books, and, in the sunniest room, a piano where she had started giving music lessons to children again. Sophia, now officially under shared custody between Edward and Amanda, a court decision that acknowledged the mistakes of the past and the importance of her aunt in her life, spent alternate weekends in New York. Edward, still processing his share of responsibility for the events, had decided to move his business to the city, allowing for greater proximity to his daughter and a gradual rebuilding of family ties. On that Sunday afternoon, close friends gathered to celebrate Amanda and Robert's engagement, a commitment sealed discreetly during a walk in Central Park, when he had finally managed to give her the small blue velvet box he had carried for weeks. Julia and Sophia, now inseparable despite their age difference, ran through the apartment, occasionally stopping to play a few clumsy notes on the piano before returning to their games. Deborah, who had become a close family friend, watched the scene with professional and personal satisfaction. As a social worker, she rarely witnessed such positive outcomes for such complex cases. "Thinking of writing a book about all this?" Robert asked, offering her a glass of champagne. "I'm already on the 3rd chapter," she confessed, smiling, "with names changed to protect everyone's privacy, of course. But it's a story that needs to be told, about how emotional abuse can hide in seemingly perfect environments, and how small acts of courage can dismantle entire systems of manipulation." Across the room, Amanda played a soft melody on the piano, while Christina, now officially employed as the family's housekeeper, served canapés to the guests. Edward was talking with the journalist Matthew Grant, who had covered the case from the beginning and was now preparing a series of reports on parental alienation and psychological abuse. "And what about Beatrice?" Deborah asked, lowering her voice. "Any news from the trial?" "The insanity plea didn't work," Robert replied. "The experts were unanimous in testifying that she was fully aware of her actions. The verdict comes out next week, but the prosecutor is confident of a conviction on all charges." At that moment, The girls ran back into the room, followed by the small puppy they had adopted together, a rescued mutt who quickly answered to the name of Valiant. "Aunt Amanda, tell that story again," Julia asked. "The one about the girl who built a bridge between two worlds." Amanda smiled, making room for both of them on the piano bench. "That story is special. It's not just a tale, you know. It's about you two." As she began the narrative, accompanied by soft notes on the piano, Robert watched the scene with a full heart. 2 years earlier, he could never have imagined that his life would take this turn, that so much happiness could be born from so much suffering. There were scars, certainly, on all of them, wounds that might never fully close, but there was also healing, growth, and a strength one only discovers when forced to rebuild something from the rubble. Sophia held up her wrist, proudly showing the charm bracelet, identical to the one Amanda wore. Julia displayed her own, a recent gift symbolizing her official entry into what they affectionately called the Survivors Club. "And the bridge she built," Amanda continued in the story, "wasn't made of wood or stone, but of memories, courage, and love. A bridge so strong that no storm could ever bring it down." Outside the apartment, the late afternoon sun gilded the buildings of New York. On the living room table, a picture frame displayed a recent photo. Amanda, Robert, Julia, and Sophia, genuine smiles lighting up their faces, with Central Park in the background. Beside it, in a smaller frame, was an old photograph of Amanda and Sophia from 5 years earlier, recovered from the belongings Beatrice had kept as trophies. 2 moments in time, separated by years of pain, but now reconnected by invisible threads of resilience and hope. A silent reminder that even in the darkest stories, there is the possibility of a new beginning. And that's how, Amanda concluded, as the final notes of the melody echoed softly, they discovered that family isn't just the one we're born into, but also the one we build along the way. A family formed not by obligation, but by choice, by love. Julia and Sophia clapped enthusiastically, as they always did at the end of the story. Even though they already knew it by heart, it was, after all, their story, a constantly evolving narrative, whose next chapter was waiting to be written with the ink of hard-won freedom and new beginnings. 2 years passed since Amanda and Robert's engagement celebration. Life had found a new rhythm for the family, formed from the ashes of painful experiences. The house in the West Village, acquired after their wedding, radiated a welcoming energy that contrasted dramatically with the cold, bashy, impersonal townhouse on the Upper East Side. On the living room walls, photos documented the journey of this unconventional family. Julia, now 9, and Sophia, 13, on various adventures, camping trips, beach vacations, school performances. Amanda and Robert's wedding, an intimate ceremony held in the gardens of the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. Edward standing beside his sister after years of gradual reconciliation, their faces reflecting the relief of old wounds finally healing. It was a sunny Sunday morning when the doorbell rang. Julia ran to answer it, followed by the now not-so-small Valiant, whose enormous paws revealed that the rescued mutt had grown far beyond initial expectations. "Aunt Deborah!" the girl exclaimed, hugging the social worker who had become an essential part of their extended family. Deborah entered carrying a bakery box and a folder of documents. "I brought those donuts you love. Where is everyone?" "Dad and Uncle Edward are setting up the new grill in the backyard. Sophia is helping Aunt Amanda with some surprise in the studio. They wouldn't let me see what it is." With a knowing smile, Deborah followed Julia to the kitchen, where she set down the pastries. Through the window, she could see Robert and Edward animatedly discussing the best technique for lighting charcoal. A mundane scene that held a much deeper meaning for anyone who knew the family's full story. "Have you told Sophia the news yet?" Deborah asked in a low voice, as Julia got plates for the donuts. The girl shook her head. "Today's the day. Aunt Amanda is nervous, even though she's trying to hide it." At that exact moment, Amanda and Sophia entered the kitchen, carrying what looked like a large, colorful poster covered with a cloth. "Deborah, I'm so glad you're here," Amanda exclaimed, hugging her friend. "I was waiting for you for the big announcement." "What announcement?" Sophia asked, looking suspiciously at the three of them. You've been hiding something from me for weeks. Even Julia has been acting weird, and she can never keep a secret." Amanda smiled nervously, exchanging glances with Deborah and her stepdaughter. "Let's get the men. It's better to tell everyone at once." Minutes later, the family gathered in the living room. Sophia watched the adults intently, her expression flickering between curiosity and a slight apprehension, a remnant of the years when surprises rarely brought good news. Amanda and Robert stood side by side, holding hands in a gesture of mutual support. The mysterious poster was propped on the couch, still covered. "Sophia, Julia," Robert began, his voice slightly thick with emotion. "You know how much this family means to us, how we found each other in the most difficult times and built something new together." "Something wonderful," Amanda added, squeezing her husband's hand. "And now we want to share some news that will change our lives once again, for the better, we hope." Sophia frowned, looking at her father as if searching for a clue about what was to come. Edward, however, seemed as surprised as she was. With a fluid motion, Amanda pulled away the cloth covering the poster, revealing a colorful collage made by Julia. In the center, in large, glitter-decorated letters, it read, "Welcome, little brother or sister." The silence that followed lasted only a few seconds, but seemed to stretch on indefinitely. Sophia stared at the poster, processing the information, while Julia practically bounced with excitement beside her. "You're—" Edward was the first to break the silence, looking at his sister with wide eyes. Amanda nodded, unconsciously bringing a hand to her still imperceptibly changed abdomen. "4 months. We wanted to make sure everything was okay before telling everyone." "I'm going to have a little brother?" Julia asked, though she already knew the answer, having helped prepare the announcement. "Or a little sister," Robert confirmed, smiling. "We don't know yet." All eyes then turned to Sophia, who remained strangely quiet. Her face was an indecipherable mask of conflicting emotions. "Sophia," Amanda called softly. "Are you okay, honey?" The teenager stood up abruptly. "I need a minute," she murmured, walking quickly towards the backyard. Edward made a move to follow her, but Amanda stopped him with a gesture. "Let me go." In the garden, carefully planned by Amanda as a therapeutic refuge, Sophia was sitting on the swing hanging from the large oak tree. Her eyes were fixed on a distant point, and her hands instinctively clutched the charm bracelet that never left her wrist. Amanda approached silently, sitting on the swing beside her. For a few moments, they just sat there, swinging gently. The silence between them filled with the chirping of birds and the light rustle of leaves. "When my dad married Beatrice," Sophia finally said, her voice almost a whisper, "she told me that when she had her own children, I wouldn't be needed anymore, that I would be replaced and forgotten." Amanda's heart ached at the revelation. It was the first time Sophia had spoken so openly about the manipulations she had suffered at Beatrice's hands. "Sophia, to look at me," Amanda asked gently. When her niece turned, Amanda could see the unshed tears glistening in her eyes, the strong girl who rarely allowed herself to show vulnerability. "You will never, ever be replaced or forgotten. The heart doesn't work like that. It doesn't have a limited space for love that needs to be reallocated when someone new arrives. It just grows to accommodate more love." Sophia nodded, almost imperceptibly. "I know that, rationally. But sometimes the old fears come back, even when I know they're irrational." "They're not irrational, they're scars," Amanda corrected her softly. "And scars sometimes ache when the weather changes. It's part of healing." A faint smile appeared on Sophia's lips. "That's one of your music teacher metaphors." Amanda laughed, relieved by the break in tension. "It works, doesn't it, Aunt Amanda?" Sophia hesitated, biting her lip slightly. "Can I ask you something?" "Anything, always. You and Uncle Robert, did you plan this, to have a baby?" Amanda took a deep breath, carefully considering her answer. "Yes and no. We weren't actively trying, but we weren't preventing it either. We let it happen naturally when the time was right. And you're not scared, after everything?" Sophia left the sentence unfinished, but the meaning was clear. "I'm scared every day." "Of many things," Amanda confessed. "Scared I won't be a good mother, that I'll make mistakes, that I won't be able to protect you all from every pain in the world, but I've learned that living in fear is only half a life, and this baby," she gently touched her belly, "doesn't diminish what I feel for you and Julia at all. In fact, I feel like you two paved the way for me to even consider being a mother again." Sophia considered those words for a moment, then stood up from the swing and, in a surprisingly spontaneous gesture for the usually reserved teenager, hugged her aunt. "I think you'll be a great mum," she murmured against Amanda's shoulder. "You already are." When they returned inside, they found the living room transformed into an impromptu celebration. Julia and Robert had hung colourful balloons, while Edward and Deborah arranged the donuts on a decorative platter. Christina, who had arrived during their garden talk, was preparing a fruit punch in the kitchen. "Everything okay?" Robert asked Amanda discreetly, as Sophia joined Julia to help with the balloons. Amanda nodded, squeezing his hand. "Everything's okay. We just need to remember that everyone has their own timeline for processing change." "Aunt Amanda," Sophia called, suddenly seeming more cheerful. "Can we see the ultrasound pictures now?" The rest of the afternoon passed in a festive mood, with plans being made for the baby's room, discussions about possible names, and speculation about who the child would look like. "I have news too," Deborah announced, when everyone was seated on the porch, enjoying the barbecue prepared by Robert and Edward. "My book on childhood emotional abuse is being published next month, and the pilot program for early intervention that we developed based on your case has been approved by the city's Department of Social Services." "That's wonderful!" Amanda exclaimed. "How many children will it help?" "Initially, we'll serve 5 public schools in the Bronx," Deborah explained. "Training for teachers to identify signs of emotional abuse, psychological support in schools, and a direct line to Child Protective Services. If it works as we hope, the project will be expanded to the entire city school system." "And what happened with the proposed law?" Robert asked, referring to the bill they had helped draft, creating stricter protocols for custody cases involving allegations of psychological abuse. "It's being debated in the State Assembly. We've gained the support of the Women's Caucus and the Parliamentary Front for the Defense of Children's Rights. There's a good chance it will pass this year." Sophia, who had been following the conversation intently, suddenly stood up. "Would you mind if I made a suggestion for the program?" Everyone turned to her, surprised by the unexpected intervention from the usually reserved teenager. "Of course not, dear," Deborah encouraged. "Any idea is welcome. I think you should include a component with the students themselves, not just the adults," Sophia suggested. "When I was going through that with Beatrice, what I lacked most was a vocabulary to explain what was happening. I didn't have words to describe how I felt, and that made me doubt my own perception." Deborah looked at the girl with growing admiration. "That's an extremely perceptive observation, Sophia. Gaslighting works exactly like that, by depriving the victim of the linguistic tools to name their experience." "We could develop a kind of workshop," Sophia continued, gaining confidence. "Using stories, like the ones Aunt Amanda used to tell me and Julia, stories about children who face difficult situations and find words to express their feelings. A social-emotional curriculum disguised as storytelling," Amanda reflected, impressed by her niece's idea. "Sophia, that's brilliant." A light blush colored the teenager's cheeks, unaccustomed to such effusive praise. "I just thought it might help other kids who are going through what I went through." "And it will," Deborah affirmed with conviction. "Would you like to participate in developing that component of the program? Your experience would be invaluable." Sophia's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Me? But I'm just a teenager." "An exceptionally intelligent and articulate teenager who has lived through an experience that few adults can fully comprehend," Deborah replied. "I can't think of anyone more qualified." The smile that lit up Sophia's face at that moment was one that would remain forever etched in the memory of everyone present, a smile of discovering her own worth, of a wound transformed into purpose. That night, after the guests had left and the girls had gone to bed, Amanda found Robert on the back porch, contemplating the starry sky with a pensive expression. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sitting beside him and resting her head on his shoulder. About how unpredictable life is, he replied, wrapping his arm around her. 3 years ago, I was living a nightmare, discovering that the woman I married was psychologically abusing my daughter. I thought I would never be able to trust anyone again. And now I have a bigger and stronger family than I ever imagined possible, a daughter who is recovering and flourishing, an extraordinary stepniece who overcomes obstacles with a courage that leaves me speechless, a wife who taught me that it's possible to rebuild after complete devastation. He placed his hand on Amanda's belly. And a baby on the way, a symbol that we believe in the future. Despite everything, Amanda smiled, covering his hand with hers. Beatrice tried to destroy lives, but she unintentionally ended up creating connections that would never have existed otherwise. You and I would never have met if she hadn't held me prisoner and then married you. There's a certain poetic justice in that, Robert agreed. As though I would never wish for the suffering we all went through to get here. Suffering that has turned into purpose, Amanda observed. Look at Sophia's initiative today. She's transforming her pain into something that will help other children. There's no more powerful lesson we could teach her. From upstairs came the soft sound of the piano, Sophia practicing a new piece Amanda had taught her, a Beethoven sonata full of dramatic contrasts and harmonic resolution. The notes flowed through the house like a sonic metaphor for the family's journey. Dissonances that eventually found their way back to harmony, without ever losing the emotional depth of their lived experiences. She's getting better and better, Robert commented, listening intently. She has a natural talent, Amanda agreed. Julia prefers the visual arts, as you've noticed from the permanently paint-stained state of our bath towels. They both laughed, sharing the comfortable intimacy of parents discussing their children's quirks. And the baby? Robert asked. What do you think their talent will be? It's still too early to speculate, but... Amanda hesitated, a mysterious smile playing on her lips. What? I have a feeling it's going to be a boy with your determination and, I hope, your smile. Robert kissed her softly. Regardless of whether it's a boy or a girl, they will be loved unconditionally. That's the only thing that really matters. Upstairs, the music changed. Sophia was now playing her own composition, a piece she had been secretly working on for the past few weeks, her gift for the baby to come. The melody was complex, alternating between contemplative passages and bursts of joy, as if telling a story of overcoming and hope. Julia appeared at the porch door, rubbing her sleepy eyes. I can't sleep with the music, she said, though her tone wasn't one of complaint. Can I stay with you guys for a little while? The three of them settled onto the wicker sofa. Julia nestled between Amanda and Robert, listening to Sophia's composition drift down the stairs like a musical blessing on the house. Sophia said she's writing a story in music, Julia explained. She said it's about all of us, how we were, how we are, and how we'll be when the baby gets here. A beautiful idea, Amanda commented, moved. She told me something else, too, Julia continued, already half asleep. She said she's decided what she wants to be when she grows up. And what's that? Robert asked, curious. A child therapist, Julia murmured, her eyes closing. To help kids who can't talk about hard things find their voice. Amanda and Robert exchanged glances over the sleeping girl's head. Words unnecessary between them. Amidst all the pain and challenges, they had managed to create an environment where not only were their daughters healing, but where they were learning to transform their experiences into compassion for others. On the New York urban horizon, the city lights twinkled like earthly stars, while Sophia's music gradually came to a serene and hopeful end. Soon, there would be a new member in their family, another life to share the extraordinary journey they had begun together, a journey that proved every day that even from the ashes of destruction can arise beauty, purpose, and a love stronger than any attempt to break it. In Amanda's womb, protected and nourished, the baby moved gently, as if responding to its cousin's music and its parents' loving thoughts. A new story was beginning, intertwined with the previous ones, a new chapter in the saga of resilience, redemption and new beginnings for the family that had found its way back to the light. And as the night peacefully advanced over the city, the house in the West Village remained illuminated not just by external lights, but by the most powerful and enduring glow of all possible lights. Hope.